I'd like to welcome you to week 6. We're continuing on the Pickles and Peppers project that we started last week. First, I want to address some questions that did come up to me. Last week, if you looked at the corporate assignment and scrolled through the instructions and went to the bottom, I did have a copy of, after the instructions, I did have a copy of the notice of the meeting of the incorporators, and I did have an agenda, which is the meeting of the incorporators. If you were using the sample one that I gave you, it was the notice of the meeting of the board of directors. You are creating, from last week, you are creating the notice of the meeting of the incorporators. So sometimes in your office, if you're given documents like this, notice of the meeting of the board of directors, but you know that you're going to have the meeting of the incorporators, you're going to have to change titles to reflect it. That's why it's really important when you're doing documents, not just use a document, but read through it and let it make sense to you and let it be addressed to who you have the meeting going to. Or even documents, if it's a complaint or something in a civil litigation matter, and if you're reading through it and if you've used it for a previous case, you're going to have to do some tweaking and some changes to the document. You're going to have to read through it so that it makes sense to each particular situation. Does that make sense? So to continue on this week, week 6, we are going to be creating the minutes of the meeting of the incorporators. So for you to get that document, you have to go back to week 5 and look at the sample documents that are given to you here. So let's look at the minutes of the meeting of the incorporators. Make this bigger. Okay. You notice that we did use an ampersand in here. We've got the INC here, which means that it's a corporation. So you get the following incorporators, and we know now who an incorporator is, right? The people starting a corporation. We're present in person on the 6th day of February, and we're going to use a current date here at 10 o'clock a.m. And once again, I don't use the old clock. I just go 10, dot, the colon, 00 a.m. to make it more current. And we were given, our attorney crossed it off, put a red hammer in it as 2150 North Avenue North. We know that Avenue we're going to spell out, right? Because we spell it in legal documents, things like that. Minneapolis, Minnesota. In the instructions, we were given the complete names of these 3 people, and we always use complete names if we can on legal documents. Every time you see a name that's like the Sam Smith is just, what is it, Samuel Kenneth Smith? Is that his name, I think? We're going to be using full names. So he was chosen as chairman of the meeting and acted in that capacity. I think it's Mary Elizabeth Rowe was chosen secretary of the meeting and acted in that capacity. I think the reason that these are capped is their titles of those type of positions. That's one of the hardest things too, is what is capped, what is not capped in our legal world. But the reason they were capped is because of titles. And acted in that capacity, the chairman reported that the articles of incorporation of this corporation were filed in the office of the Secretary of the State of Minnesota on the 5th day of February, use a current year here, and that the Secretary of State issued to that corporation a certificate of incorporation numbered. And if you put a number on the top of your certificate, remember our certificate we did for this week, which is right here. If you put a number at the top of your document, you're going to want to include that in your minutes, because they're just reporting this was our certificate that we used. Dated February 5th per year, that the existence of said corporation began on that date. And when I say use current year, don't type use current year. Actually, like this year, we would type it. Okay. On motion duly made and seconded, what is a motion? you're asking to do something, right? I make a motion that I make a motion that the chairman be instructed to cause a copy of the articles of incorporation along with a certificate of incorporation issued by the state of Minnesota to be inserted in the minutes of the book of Pickles and Pepper, okay? That was a motion made. It's kind of like when you think of civil litigation, when we think of that term motion, we're asking to do something, we're asking the court to do something. So this motion was made at this meeting, this take place, okay? And someone seconded, because in Robert's Rules of Order, which is usually followed in a lot of meetings, they have to make a motion, they have to second it, and then what they do is they resolve it, it now becomes part of that company, that the chairman was going to take that articles of incorporation and they're going to insert it in that minute book, because remember in your packet, it talked about the minute book, and the minute book is the history of our corporation. We put out a lot of things in our minute book, like starting with the articles of incorporation. And minutes are a huge factor in a corporation because minutes protect your officers. It tells of decisions that are made within our corporation. And like this one, we could go back and this is why we decided to do this. Well, somebody made a motion, somebody seconded, and this is why we did it. The chairman then stated that the next order of business was the adjournment for the meeting of the first board of directors. Sometimes a lot of people want to, sometimes I want to cap this after, but actually it's not the title of the board of directors. They're not the first board of directors. They're the board of directors, but it was the first board of directors. I think if you put a capital F on this, of course it wouldn't be a big deal. If your attorney didn't like it, they would tell you just to make it lowercase. There was no further business to come before the incorporators, and the meeting was adjourned. This little squiggly little mark right here means that we're going to take that out. We're going to put a full name here, Mary Elizabeth Rowe, comma, acting as secretary for the incorporators, because she actually hasn't become the secretary, she's still acting. And remember that we always start our name here right at the left-hand side of the signature line. We always have 3 single spaces in between there, and we have this line beyond the 4th single space. And I always start documents, because of the new word, I always start them using no spacing on the Styles tab, just so that it lines up better. A test, what does a test mean?
They're verifying it.
Yeah, they put in that signature right there. We're going to draw another signature line there. Don't reuse the full name again, Samuel Kenneth Smith, that is going to comma chairman, starting at the left-hand side. Once you would do a test, we say the lines, the 4th line being your line here. Questions on this document? Okay, let's see what our next. Create the call and waiver of the notice of the meeting of the first board of directors. Once again, our sample documents. Oops. Call and waiver of notice of, because this is just a sample document, we have to fill, we've got lines here, right? But once we fill in that information, we take out the lines, right, because they're place savers, because we don't know the information there. We are creating, let me go back to the instructions. The meeting of the first board of directors. So, first board of directors. Call and waiver the notice of the meeting of the first board of directors would be filled in this one. We, the undersigned, which means all the people signing this document, being all of the blank of Pickles and Peppers, well, this is the board of directors, right? So this would be the, all of the, do we know what we put in that blank? All of the directors of Pickles and Peppers do hereby call a special meeting of the board of directors to be held at the registered office of the corporation in the, and we have to get the time for this from our minutes. So we have to go back to the minutes. And I'll grab those in just a second and put the blank fills in. And consent to the transaction of any all business which may properly, this is property, one's going to have to read through documents because there might be some typos on even on samples. So properly come before said meeting, and we hereby waive all requirements as to the notice of such meeting, dated this blank, date of blank. And then we've got some lines that we're going to sign. Okay? Do you remember from your packet why we have to do this document?
So they waive the rights to their mailed notices?
Exactly. They're waiving their right to that 14-day prior notice. So they come in and they read this, I've waived that right. These are going to be started at 3 on the ruler. I like to start my signature lines on 3 on the ruler at the top. If you don't see a ruler at the top, go into Word and go into View, and then you'll see ruler, and then just click the little ruler. Start this at 3. 3 spaces in between, 4, space, 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 4, space, 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 4. Okay. Now let's figure out this time right here. Let me go grab my other documents here. Okay. So to get that time, we're going to the minutes of the first board of directors. And we see that that meeting was called at 10:30 a.m. Okay? And it was held on the 6th day of February, right? So let's go back to our call and waiver. Okay. To be honest, the register in the preparation at, we're going to kind of change this language up. To be at the registered office of the corporation at 10:30 a.m. on the 6th day of February, comma, put the current year there, and consent to the transaction. So we kind of just changed the language a little bit. Let me read that again.
Yep. Do you need any names under the signature lines?
Good question. If you had like a small board of directors, and if you wanted to put their names underneath it, you could. In our particular case, we don't have to, because they're just going to sign it and they're just waiving the notes. But you know, sometimes it's nice to type out the names because if they scribble, you don't know actually, if you're to look at that like a year later, who actually did waive that notice of that meeting, you know, you'd have that typed underneath it. Good question. So once again, that language here is to be held at the registered office of the corporation at 10:30 a.m. on the 6th day of February, comma, and then use the current date. Okay? Questions on that?
Do we have to fill in the blank spaces dated this blank day of blank?
Yes, dated this 6th day of February, comma, use the current date. As they're coming into that meeting on the 6th day, they're waiving their notice, and it's dated that day. Yes.
Do you want us to write out 6, or can we just use the number?
You can just use the number, or you can write it out if you want to.
And so it doesn't matter?
Yeah.
You're supposed to use the number, not use the date, I think.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because typically it's numbers 1 through 10 you write out, but we're talking February 6th. Yeah. That's a good
fine.
question.
I was just
That's a
like-
great question.
I'm pretty sure, because I have a hard time with numbers, but I think that when I do remember that, like,
From the mail
dates
slip.
and like measurements.
Mm-hmm.
It's always,
Up and you use the number, or whatever, like, date, numbers, use the actual.
And there's actually a whole chapter in the announcement on how to properly do that. But Carrie, you're right. You are right.
I have a question about the title, I'm sorry, I missed it. Is it
Okay.
call and waiver of notice of meeting of board of directors, is that what it is, or?
Call and waiver of notice of the meeting of the first board of directors of Pickles and Peppers Inc. Because we're going to identify our corporation too.
and for the pickles and peppers, you want us to use that little...
That little emphasis on
Yep.
In the top 2 blanks, it was directors and board of directors? No, in the language.
Oh, we undersign being all of the directors of Pickles and Peppers.
And then the next one is board of directors, or is it just
Special meeting
directors?
of the first board of directors.
Oh.
Yep.
I do have a question. In the instructions, it talks about the first board of directors, shareholders, and first elected board of directors after incorporation.
Which one are you talking about?
For number 5 on the
Oh, and the instructions.
instructions, they talk about 3 different documents.
So prepare to call and waive the notice of next 3 meetings, schedule the date and times. Yes, and that's what we'll do next, too. So that's the first one.
So don't worry about the other ones right now.
Yep, we have those to do too. Because then you go down here and it says, create the call and waiver of the notice of the meeting of the shareholders.
Okay.
So you're gonna change that up. My sample here. You're gonna use that same sample form that we used there, but we're gonna change it up to read the shareholders. Where's that? Okay, so we're going to do it for shareholders. Let's go back to that sample. So it would be call and a waiver of notice of the first meeting of the shareholders of Pickles and Peppers. Okay. We, the undersigned, being all of the shareholders of Pickles and Peppers, do hereby call a special meeting of the shareholders to be held at the registered office of the corporation at, if we went into the minutes of the shareholders, we would find that that meeting is at 11 a.m. on the 6th day of February 2000, or whatever date you're using. And it would still be dated the 6th day of February, because they had their meetings one after another. They had, in this particular case, they had their incorporators meeting and the shareholders, and then the next meeting happens. Make sense? Okay. We're also going to do the call and waiver of the notice of the first elected board of directors after incorporation. So, oops, let me get that back to it back again. So call and waiver of notice of the meeting of the first elected board of directors after incorporation of Pickles and Peppers. Okay.
So for the second line, it's always Pickles and Peppers.
Yes.
The first line is whatever you're creating it for.
Right.
Okay.
Yep, good question. So we, the undersigned being all of the directors of Pickles and Peppers, we hereby call a special meeting of the first elected board of directors after incorporation. We held at the registered office. If you went into the minutes, you would see that meeting was held at 11:30 a.m. on the 6th day of February.
And do you keep
Let's
all
get
the same
to-
caps for that name?
That first elected board of directors after incorporation. I could go either way on that. I'm not real picky. You could initial cap F, initial cap E on elected, initial cap after initial cap incorporated if you wanted to. Or you could just do initial cap B on board and initial cap D of directors. I'm not real picky on that. Okay. It is kind of a title, so you could kind of initial cap it because it is the title of the meeting. But it actually is the first elected board of directors. Kind of a real gray area on that one. Okay. So we're clear on that one. And then the last thing you're going to do is create the minutes of the meeting of the first board of directors. And that one is your sample documents. And that's that meeting that we went through. Oh, I didn't do the first board of directors. First board of directors is this one. So the first board of directors, special meeting of the first board of directors was held on the 6th day of February. Put in a current date here at 10:30. Once again, just put AM at the registered office of the corporation in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The following members were present. Full names again. We're using full names. The following offers were made to purchase stock of the corporation for a rate of $100 per share. Samuel Kenneth Smith for 40 shares. John Franklin, is that right? For 40 shares, and Mary Elizabeth for 20 shares. Upon motion made, duly made, and seconded, the following resolution was unanimously adopted. So someone made a motion, someone seconded, and it was resolved, and you'll notice this is all in caps, and this is, anytime you resolve something, if you made a motion and you seconded, you don't want to grab this and pull it in so that it stands out in the document. You know how to do that? You highlight it all and you go up to the top. And you can move your ruler over and you can pull them in, or you can tab it in. There's many different ways you can do it. So you don't want to pull this in from your left margin, you see here. Resolve is always in capital letters. It pulls your attention to this is what took place at the meeting. It said offers be accepted by the first board of directors and that the proper officers of the corporation, when elected, be authorized and directed to issue such shares of stock upon payment of the full, therefore, in the corporation which payment is hereby acknowledged in the following manner. Once again, we're going to be putting this in our minute book. So we've got record that we took certificate 1 and it was for 40 shares, and this is who it went to, full name. Certificate 2 for 40 shares went to full name. Certificate 3, 20 shares stock, full name. There's no further business to come before the meeting, and the meeting was adjourned. Once again, you're going to be taking this out, and you're going to be taking this out. You're going to give them titles, so you don't need to put that. That was just highlighting the document. Questions? Okay. Well, that will end it for this week. Email me if you have any questions at all. And we will continue working on this project next week.